A strange and heavy quiet settles over the center of the land as 2 million people stand in a vast, natural amphitheater defined by two limestone giants that pierce the horizon. While the heat of the morning begins to ripple over the valley floor, the massive crowd remains perfectly motionless, watching as Joshua stands at the center, flanked by the Levites who carry the golden ark of the covenant, representing the very throne of God in the midst of a newly conquered territory. The air is thick with anticipation and the scent of dry, crushed earth, particularly as the great slabs of rock are brought to the valley floor, each coated in a thick, wet layer of white lime plaster that catches the morning sun like a blinding mirror. Though no one moves, the gravity of this moment is etched into the faces of the weary soldiers and the wide eyes of the children who realize they are waiting for the command that will lock their future into place. This is not merely a gathering for the sake of ceremony, but a calculated national commitment to a standard that will define every generation to follow. Yet, one must ask how a wandering nation secures its legacy in a land that is not yet fully theirs. The silence is not for show, but a tactical necessity, because to understand the consequence of this day, you have to look at the very walls that hold these 2 million souls, trapped between the promise of life and the threat of ruin. The march from the Jordan crossing through the heart of the hill country followed the ancient trade routes that snaked through the rugged interior, representing a deliberate movement of a nation, carving a path through hostile territory toward the strategic heart of Shechem. As the columns of tribes stretched across the dust of the valley, they closed the distance to the mountains that would serve as their altar of witness, entering a valley that functions as a massive geological acoustic chamber created by the deliberate alignment of Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. These two mountains act as massive soundboards, with steep, concave limestone faces capable of catching a human voice and projecting it across the entire basin, which served in the ancient world as a masterpiece of natural engineering that ensured every word spoken by the priests would be heard clearly by even the furthest tents in the outskirts of the camp. Because the choice of these mountains was not random, as Gerizim was known for its springs and lush vegetation, while Ebal remained a rugged, barren and shadow-drenched peak, Joshua split the tribes into two groups to create a physical divide that mirrored the spiritual stakes of the covenant. One side stood upon the mountain of the blessing, looking out over the green slopes of life and abundance, while the other side stood upon the mountain of the curse, looking up at the jagged, brown and lifeless rocks that represented the natural result of turning away from the Creator. This was a sonic seal, designed to ensure that no man, woman or child could ever claim they did not understand the terms of the agreement. And as the voices began to echo off the canyon walls, the sound created a surround sound effect that enveloped the entire nation in the audible reality of the law. While the valley itself divides the people between the verdant slopes of blessing and the jagged shadow of the curse, the physical center of this assembly is not a throne or a monument, but a simple altar of unhewn stone that demands a complete rejection of the ornate idols of the surrounding Canaanite world. To continue uncovering these hidden realities of the biblical text and walk deeper into the context of the scriptures, subscribe to this channel and join us on this journey through the ancient world, as the contrast of the two mountains sets the stage for the choice that determines their survival. Rather than building an elaborate temple filled with polished statues and carved metal icons like the surrounding nations, Israel was commanded to construct an altar of whole, natural, unhewn stones that had not been altered or reshaped by the hands of man. This was a powerful, silent declaration that the presence of God is not something humans can manufacture, refine, or polish into existence, for by forbidding the use of iron, The law forced the people to recognize that their covenant was a gift they received rather than a product they had created through industrial sophistication. Beside this altar stood the pillars coated in white lime, which served as a massive, luminous billboard of the law for all to see, effectively democratizing the covenant by ensuring the standard of holiness was not locked away in a palace or a temple, but stood plainly in the heart of the land. As the sun beat down on those white surfaces, the laws became bright, readable, and inescapable markers that burned into the memory of the people, turning the law into a glowing, inescapable witness for every tribe below. If the stones are the witnesses to this treaty, one must consider what weight their words carry when the final choice is made. For the true weight of these words begins to dawn on the nation. They are not here to celebrate a victory, but to sign a legal re-entry permit that hinges entirely on the sound of their own voices. The climactic moment arrives when the Levites begin to shout the blessings and curses across the amphitheater, causing the sound to grow from a low rumble into a thunderous roar that bounces between the two mountains and makes the very ground feel as if it is vibrating with the authority of the words. When the blessings are shouted toward Mount Gerizim, the valley rings with the promise of prosperity and peace for those who remain faithful to the covenant. But when the curses are called toward Mount Ebal, the atmosphere turns heavy with the warning of what happens when a nation breaks its word. Every individual in that valley is forced to reconcile their own heart with the reality of those words, realizing this was the moment the nation of Israel solidified its legal claim to the land of Canaan, not by the strength of their swords, but by their public, collective agreement to live under the direct authority of the law. They were essentially stating that if they failed to keep these standards, they forfeited their right to dwell in the land, creating a contract of total surrender where they traded their autonomy for a relationship with the Most High. The scene was designed to be impossible to forget, with white stones gleaming in the distance and the echoes of the curses hanging in the stagnant air above the shadow of Mount Ebal, marking a defining milestone that shifted their identity from a wandering tribe to a nation bound by a living document. Even long after the plaster cracked and the stones were covered by the dust of the following centuries, the reality of that day remained the foundational anchor for their national identity, for they lived with the constant reminder that the mountain of the curse was a permanent physical symbol, that their future was a fragile thing, held together only by the weight of the words they had shouted into the valley. As the echoes finally died away and the people began to pack their tents, they did so with the knowledge that they were not wandering anymore. Considering the gravity of this covenant, what is the one area of your own life where you find it most difficult to fully commit to God's standards? Let us know in the comments below. They were stewards of a covenant, living on a land that had heard their promise and would eventually hold them to every syllable, serving as a reminder that the geography of the valley watched over them while they waited for the day when the choice between the mountain of blessing and the mountain of curse would be tested in the real world of struggle. This was the day that changed Israel forever, setting the stage for every triumph and every tragedy that would fill the pages of their history, all rooted in that singular echoing morning in the Valley of Two Mountains, confirming that the path to true freedom is found only in the deliberate, courageous choice to walk in total alignment with the word of the Creator.